In a world overflowing with distractions, we seek meaning. How do we transform ambition into something deeper, into true fulfillment? I'm Sam Pepin, CEO of Course Educa, and I've spent years helping businesses succeed by connecting their goals to something bigger. On the Meaningful Podcast, we explore not just how to win in business, but how to grow as individuals. Through conversation with thought leaders, innovators, and everyday heroes, we uncover the stories that drive us towards something greater. Whether you're striving for success, seeking purpose, or just looking for the next steps in your journey, this podcast is your guide to navigating the intersection of ambition, growth, and meaning. So please join me and our incredible guests as we redefine what's possible in both business and life. Enjoy. True transformation begins when you stop surviving your story and start rewriting it with intention. Welcome to the Meaningful Podcast. I'm your host, Sam Pepin, and today we're diving into 3 powerful themes: rewiring your brains through neuroscience, breaking the chains of addiction, and building a life rooted in purpose and recovery. Our guest today is George Haymaker, a certified neuroconstructivist, coach, and neuroeducator. After overcoming a severe addiction to painkillers and alcohol, George rebuilt his life from rock bottom through science-based transformations and now help others do the same. From creating a mission-driven ice cream brand to coaching high achievers through deep behavioral shift, George's journeys prove that change is not only possible, it's a neurological reality. If you enjoyed this discussion, please let the world know with a like, a small review, or even a quick share. Your supports help more people find meaningful content just like this. Let's begin. Mr. George Haymaker, welcome on the Meaningful Podcast. How are you doing?
I'm great, Sam. Great Sunday morning to you. Thanks for having me.
It's lovely to see you. Absolutely. Great Sunday morning for everybody who's listening if you do so on this date. And it's lovely to be able to welcome George on the podcast. And to kick us off, please tell us more about George Haymaker Consulting and Coaching.
Yeah, my pleasure. So I am a neuroscience coach and neuroeducator, which in short is just a fancy way of saying I help people make transformational changes in their mental and behavioral lives. I got into it because of my life history, what I went through, and I struggled a lot with thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, and ultimately leading to an addiction to pain pills and alcohol. So, I just went through a complete transformation myself, and at my stage of life right now, I'm wanting to give back and help others. And I just thought, what a shame to waste that experience just on myself. Why not help others achieve a significant transformational change in their lives as well?
Beautiful. And I definitely want to go back to some of that early stage of your life for not only context, but also I think quite an incredible narrative that is very, very dear to a lot of our audience. You grew up in a very unsettling environment from what I was able to see, and truly that contributed to low self-worth and a lot of anxiety, which seems to basically be able to perhaps give you a platform to grow, but I suppose quite difficult to navigate in your youth. Tell me more about what made this environment so unsettling at first, and perhaps how you were able to battle and get better through it.
Sure. Well, my dad was a corporate climber, so very successful in his career. The result of that, though, was that we had to move about every year or two to a different city. So I was constantly being uprooted out of environments, having to settle into new ones, new schools, new friends, constantly saying goodbye. So that in and of itself was fairly unsettling. And then I grew up at a time when physical discipline was kind of the mode of how you raise kids. So there was a significant amount of physical discipline in our home, and I was being already unsettled with all the moving. It just further unsettled me. So, obviously the message when you discipline kids physically is that they're not worthy, right? Something about them is wrong. So there was a lot of that. My parents moved overseas when I was in 9th grade, and I stayed here in the United States to go to boarding school. So there was an aspect of fending for myself in that way. I was only able to see him once a year. And then there was some sexual abuse that occurred at a young age with some neighborhood boys. So I guess those would be the main traumatic type experiences that went on. So by the time I got to college, I was pretty uncomfortable, a lot of anxiety, as you said. I wetted the bed all the way up until I was a senior in high school.
Wow.
Yeah. And so what happened was I found drugs and alcohol in college, and we have a lot of addiction in our family. The entire side of my family on my mom's side were addicts in some way, shape, or form. So I already had that genetic predisposition. So I began to cope that way. And for the next 30 years of my adulthood, I was an entrepreneur. I was high functioning and high performing, but I just carried with me all of these discomforts mentally and behaviorally that were byproducts of my childhood. And I was coping with drugs and alcohol, which only made it worse. And so that's how I led my life, high stress, high activation, coping with, addictive substances until I hit a hard bottom at the age of 52. And from significant pain pill and alcohol usage. And, I had a real come to Jesus moment where I had to decide if that was going to be how I went out of this world or if I was going to figure out, how to rebuild my life. And that's kind of where it all started.
Yeah, beautiful. And I want to talk to you about some of that. What fueled this entrepreneurial drive? You were talking about the fact that obviously very unsettling environments, but and even with that was quite successful as well. So I'm sure you pick up some great skill sets or I suppose behaviors from him. But when you're getting to the nitty gritty of it, what was the reason why you went into entrepreneurial ventures in the first place?
Great question. I think there's probably a couple answers to that. Every entrepreneur will tell you that there's this voice inside of them that speaks to them about that. I just didn't like to listen to others. I think a lot of it had to do with that childhood where I was striving to prove myself, my own identity, my own self-worth. And I think that that was a vocation that I could do that. Everything hung on me. And so I really do think that had a lot to do with it, with not feeling enough, having self-doubt, and this being a way to prove to myself, and I think my father, that I was worthy. So I think that was part of it. And I just think that also the frequent moving and having to fend for myself, going to boarding school in 9th grade and just being on my own, you become very independent and you become very resilient. And entrepreneurialism is all about those types of things.
No, absolutely. It's interesting because the way you describe it, it's very, very similar to a lot of athletes and anyone in the competitive field. They sorts of proving yourself towards basically either a parents, either even maybe basically a girl that break your heart in college. We heard that very often in sports, for example. There's this very interesting understanding. I think it was actually Rainer Maria Reich, if I'm not mistaken, and they had this great quote called basically, which is the only journey is the one within. It seemed like you had this sort of narrative from a very young age, which made that journey quite extensive and complex, even basically at when you were in your college years, which is definitely atypical. I want to rebound on some of the comments you made about the sort of the descent into addictions just a little bit. There's very often, and I'm sure you know the people that have addictions. I know a bunch of them as well. Tell me more about, since you have basically this entrepreneurial urge, we tend to be people of control, right? We depend upon ourselves. We like to have things basically in our control and sort of being able to matter within the conclusions of any outcomes. Tell me more about the illusion of control and sort of the denial phase with addiction. Did you ever struggle with that?
I'm sorry, what was the last part of the question with what phase of addiction?
So I was thinking, was there ever this illusion of control and denial with addiction in your case, sort of this duality?
Oh, losing control. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, I think that, as far as entrepreneurialism, yeah, having that level of control, wanting things to be on you, just because you from a young age, you haven't developed those social connections where, you've created these, tribes or relationships where you are relying on other people to help you accomplish things. There was really none of that for me. It was all having to pick myself up and figure out what to do next. So I just think, and we can get into this in a little bit, I think, about how influential childhood is on how we end up as adults. It's just,
Absolutely.
it's crucial. But, so as far as addiction goes, what happens is, as most people know, it's a progressive disease. And what that means is it begins to shift from you having control over your usage, having it be impulsive when you want to do it, to it gradually progressing and shifting over a line into being compulsive, where now it makes the decisions. And, I don't remember exactly the time that happened, but I remember it around a time of my life where it no longer was within my control. It had me, and it was making all the decisions.
And I suppose that's probably the moment where you said, you know what, that's enough, and you finally sort of decided to seek help. Would that be fair to assume?
Yeah, I wish I had that much wherewithal to say that was enough, because if so, I would have done it a lot sooner. If this were a visual podcast, I'd show you a picture of what I look like. I still have it. Number one picture in my photo album, so I can look at it when I need to, is the morning I went into rehab. And at the end, I was doing 50 pain pills a day and 2 bottles of vodka. And I was waking up every couple of hours to ingest more so that I could go back to sleep. It was ugly. So it was more of hitting a wall where I just simply could not go on anymore. It wasn't really me making a conscious decision that, I guess I did pull myself up and get into rehab. So with sort of that degree, I guess I made a decision, but it felt like I had to, the consequences had to be so significant for me to want to make a change.
Yeah, I'm quoting you here, but you said at a life-death crossroad, I enter rehab and begin a process of self-discovery and recovery, which I think is a narrative that is shared among your peers. You obviously know that life way better than I do, but it's there's something to be said about basically this sort of this new self narratives. I suppose when you were in rehab, was there ever some of the what were the biggest challenges of this early recovery as you saw yourself changing and perhaps this evolving into this new self?
Yeah, great question. So I just remember sitting there, in pain, because withdrawal is no fun. And I was 52, asking myself, and you look around and you see everybody else that's there, and you're asking yourself how you got here. You're in a withdrawal room, for 7 days, basically just coming off whatever substances you're on. You're miserable. And this is, I had to leave my partnership. I was in a restaurant group partnership to get help. And I just, was at wit's end. I just didn't know how I had gotten there and what was going to be next. And I was ashamed that it had gotten to this point. And so it was when I say a life-death crossroads, I actually tried to kill myself, and the first responders had to come, and fortunately it didn't work out, and so I just didn't know what was next. And then in rehab, you get people that come in and speak, and they're all bright-eyed, and they have They used to be in the same place I was, and they've somehow come out of it. And you're looking at these people just having no idea how you're going to get to be where they are. And I just didn't know what recovery looked like. I didn't even know how I had gotten to the place I was. I just had never taken any time to understand why my thoughts were so unpleasant. My feelings were so unpleasant. Why I was behaving the way I was above and beyond the addiction. It was anger. It was defensiveness. It was hypersensitivity. Always feeling like people were threatening me even when they weren't. It was just constant activation and stress. And that's just how I led my life. And so I knew that that wasn't going to be sustainable, the path forward, but I just didn't know what came next. And so fortunately, I was so broken that I would have done anything to get better. And that's really where you need to be, and why a lot of people don't change is because their consequences aren't high enough for them to make that decision to change. Because the first step in change is motivation and commitment. And if you're not truly there or willing to do what it takes, the likelihood that you're going to be successful in change goes way down.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned this come to Jesus moment. Was religion or spirituality perhaps a one of the moments of clarity and personal breakthroughs in that process?
It became that way. I was never religious or never really spiritual. Again, I was a black and white, nuts and bolts, achiever. Yeah, it either was or it wasn't. Not a lot of areas of gray. And I just didn't, I just felt like I was going to prove myself come hell or high water. I didn't need anybody else, even a spiritual influence or God or anybody else to help me. It was going to be on George Haymaker. And so that's how I conducted my life. And one of the things you recognize is that you are not the most important entity in this world. Far from it. I really was just needed to find my place and start being a lot kinder to myself and those around me. And so really just getting yourself within a renewed identity that everything around you is greater than you, and you just need to find your place in it. So that was a part of it. I did go into AA initially, have a great experience there for 4 or 5 years. It helped transition me. A big part of AA is spirituality. But recovery to me now means something different.
I'm sure it does. And one thing that was fascinating, George, and I'd love to get to the entrepreneurial side now, is during your recovery, and I heard this in the past, but you did something quite amazing with it. Actually, you had basically intense sugar cravings, typically led by the fact that basically you're trying to find something else to solve basically the addiction that you currently have, sort of a perhaps an alternative door, which led you to create a healthier basically ice cream, RETHINK Ice Cream. Tell me more about some of not only the idea behind the RETHINK Ice Cream, but I suppose what was the mission of RETHINK and how it aligns with your recovery in the first place.
Yeah. So as you say, I did transfer addictions, and you'll see a lot of alcoholics and addicts do that. They either become smokers, or a transfer to sugar, other types or they'll eat a lot, things of that nature. And really what that is you're just seeking any type of comfort that you can find. And so I was eating a lot of Haagen-Dazs and putting on weight, feeling the inflammatory effects of saturated fat and sugar. And that's no way to recover, right? That's not getting at the root causes of what it is that was troubling you to begin with. And so over time, I began to really employ total health of mind, body, and spirit to my recovery. And I said, I'd really like to continue enjoying dessert and ice cream in particular, because that was always a childhood favorite of mine. And of course, my entrepreneurial brain kicked in, and I looked around in the marketplace for an ice cream that tasted as good as Haagen-Dazs, but was a lot lower in sugar and fat. And I couldn't really find one. So I spent 6 months in a kitchen with a food scientist developing one. And that's how Rethink Ice Cream came to be. And the mission was to support mental health and addiction amongst college students. And so that's, as you remember from the story, I started using substances in college. And I think a lot of college students feel anxious and a lot of self-doubt, especially in today's day and age with social media and the rest. And so I wanted to, be a voice for them, have to share my story, and then provide resources in whatever way I could to them to help make that journey easier. And so that was really the mission of the brand, was to create resources to advocate for those issues.
Beautiful. Absolutely. There's and this is so interesting. I think so vital to understand from a psychological and perhaps even a neuroscientific side of things, which we'll dive into in a second. When you were obviously in rehab doing something that now you were able to love, that was actually productive, that was actually helping others, that must have felt absolutely amazing. This sort of sentiment of being able to create something out of nothing, and perhaps basically even some of these very, very deep signaling thoughts that you had, to turn those into something as beautiful of a mission and a product, must have felt incredible. Tell me more about sort of, was that something that helped you along the line of obviously the rehab and everything else, the AA as well, all the help you received? Was that achievement in this sense of self-pride, of just being able to turn those signaling thoughts into an amazing quests, is something that made you felt a little bit more, I suppose, worthy? And how does that impact your self-worth at that specific moment?
Yeah, a great question, very critical to recovery. As an entrepreneur, you're used to creating things, but the question is for what and for who? And prior to recovery, I created to accumulate, for results, for extrinsic rewards, things that, maybe I could hang on the wall or drive on the road or whatever it might be.
Sure.
And what you learn in neuroscience and the neuroscience of change is those extrinsic rewards are very short-lived. They're not, they don't reward what's deep within us, our values, our beliefs, the things that really make us tick as human beings. Those, if you ever notice when you got something like a car or something materialistic, it was great for a moment, but then the shine kind of went away and you were off looking for the next thing. And that's what happens with these dopamine surges in our brain, is that they're very short-lived. And so they spike, they give us moments of pleasure, then they recede, and then we're left with nothing really long-lasting after that. Well, when you give to others, it tends to reward you in different ways. It gives you a sense of achievement. It really aligns with my personal values of trying to help others and being a positive impact on others. It's one of my values. And so what happens there is it enriches you from the inside out, and it releases different types of, feel-good chemicals other than dopamine. It releases serotonin and, endorphins and things that are much longer lasting. The curve on those is much more extending. And it kind of affects you in a different way than these extrinsic rewards. So yeah, it became a cornerstone of my recovery, of trying to, instead of gratifying myself, how could I be of impact to others? And I noticed how much better it made me feel. And when you feel good inside as an addict, then you have no need or desire to want to screw that up with addictive substances.
Yeah, exactly. And it's To me, that's again an intrinsic part of what life is, and obviously you became fascinated by how the brain works, and you start to explore neuroplasticity as well, which is very interesting. And it's all about this sort of how can we accumulate the puzzle pieces that is necessary for this puzzle to be made. In your case, obviously, to recover from those addictions. When you're thinking about how the brain have the abilities to rewire itself, and you talk about the fact that how childhood obviously impact who you are. There's this big obviously phenomenon called the phase 7. Obviously, Freud talk a lot of that, which is one of my favorite author of all time, and others as well. The 0 to 7 phase being so critical. Tell me more about, I suppose, just how vital it is, and afterwards just basically angle that answer with sort of how neuroscience applies to addiction itself.
Sure. So addiction, I'll start with that one first. It's actually a malfunctioning of the reward system. So, the number one job of our brain is to survive. That is by far the most important job of the brain. Everything else comes second. And so the brain is constantly seeking reward for things that will help it survive. So that's why, we were given pleasure when we eat a great meal, drink water, socialize with people, have sex, because those are all things that are going to help us survive as a species. What happens and so if you were to look at a graph, generally humans operate at a level of 50 units of measure of dopamine at homeostasis. So that's what causes us to have enough energy to get out of bed. When we have a great meal, have sex, things that, natural life pleasures that give us dopamine, exercise, socialize with a great friend, play a great round of golf, our dopamine will surge maybe up to 100 in that range. And then it'll recede back. Okay. So that's normal range of what we live in is 50 to 100 as human beings. The problem with drugs and other behavioral addictions is that the dopamine surge can be 10 times what having sex is. So meth can take you to 1,000. Cocaine can take you to 500. And these are levels far beyond what the brain was ever meant to go to.
Sure.
And so what happens is the entire reward system of the brain, the limbic network, gets reconfigured, and drugs causes it to malfunction so that nothing else in life matters except for seeking rewards at that level. And because the brain is wired to pursue as much reward as it can find. And so what makes addiction so insidious is that because there's so much dopamine traveling between neurons, is that it begins to get resistant to the dopamine. So it requires more and more of it, which is tolerance, in order to have similar effects. And then as the dopamine levels begin to recede from those very high levels back down to homeostasis, the withdrawing effect is what's so painful. And so the human body doesn't want to go through that discomfort, which is why we reuse again to get back up to what now feels like normal at these elevated levels. And we're caught in this trap. And so that's what happens neurologically during addiction. And so what, we have to do when we recover is abstain long enough from those drugs and alcohol that those neural pathways begin to go quiet, become dormant, they weaken because we're not using them anymore. And then we begin to shift over to normal life pleasures again and reset the whole reward system back down to its 50 to 100 level where it's meant to be.
It's quite fascinating. I was listening to Carl Sagan, the science communicator, about this understanding that brain is obviously it's like a muscle. And he was talking about the fact that when it's used to feel good, then understanding is joyous, and you're craving more, just like any sorts of other addictions. For you specifically, as you see this modern world sort of perhaps it sort of emerging itself into the world of AI and machine learning and all these other things that will be able to surpass the human brain just from a sheer capability, from a sheer memory standpoint. How important do you think basically it is for others to understand their brain better so they can help change their habits and optimize basically themselves as human beings?
Well, it's critical, and I know I didn't, and I don't think a lot of people understand what their brain's capable of. And it all starts from a place that, who we are today, who you are sitting right there in that chair, who I am sitting here, and who all your listeners are at this moment is a compilation of all of their past experiences. So everything that they've done, thought, felt, and behaved, the actions they took, are all their past experiences, and now those are represented in their brains physiologically as neural pathways. So it's almost like your brain is a record of everything you've done. And so if we find ourselves at a point in time where we're not happy with what's being conjured into our mind, our thoughts, feelings, and our ideas of how to behave, then we can absolutely change that by having new experiences. So if we have new experiences, those then get laid into the brain as new neural pathways, and then our brain begins to go to those as past experiences, as templates for what to experience in the future. And that's really what neuroplasticity is all about, is your brain will be any way that you want it to be, but it all has to do with how you train it. So it's very similar to going to the gym, right? You don't expect that you're just going to get big muscles, thinking about it. But you have to go to the gym and repeat the same exercises over and over again. You have to look at your brain the same way you do as maybe your muscles, and going to the gym or learning a language or learning an instrument or learning a golf swing, is that you don't expect to be good at those things right away. You don't expect to reach that optimum level. Same thing with your brain and how it thinks, feels, and behaves. You have to work at it. You have to train it.
Yeah, exactly. No, their brain is a muscle, no doubt. When you're obviously today, you are a certified neuroconstructionist, and I hope I pronounced this right, and also a neuroeducator. So you really basically formalize your knowledge in by becoming a certified, basically neuroscience coach, and obviously allowing you to help others in the process. Tell me more about that's always been something. I'm a NLP certified a few times in a few different basically topics. But tell me more about the training process for neuroscience coaching.
Sure. Well, there's two aspects. One is the neuroscience and one is how to coach. And, they're different. I take a neuroconstructionist approach to coaching because that's where the science is. So it's really critical for coaches and for the client to understand how the brain works, why it's the way that it is, and how it's going to get from point A to point B. Because when I was recovering and figuring out a new way, it was really important to me to understand the whys, hows, and wheres, and so I could get my arms around it. And so that's what, I do as a neuroscience coach, is I explain the brain, where it's at, what's happened to it, and what we're going to do to shift it, and how all that works. And that's really enlightening for people, especially, professionals that, understand everything about their businesses. They're usually very inquisitive, and for them to get an understanding that they can actually impact their brains in whatever way they want and increase their own personal performance, leading to greater success in their businesses, because you cannot believe how much this stuff relates to how well they're going to do in their businesses. For them to be able to make that realization or to understand how to really grab and command their brains is just fascinating to most people.
Yeah, and you're preaching to the choir here. Obviously, we use neuroscience to a very large extent in our practice and what we're doing basically in business development. From your perspective, obviously biased perspective, but one that I shared, so I'd like to go deeper into it. What do you think sets neuroscience coaching apart from traditional performance and in personal development methods?
Well, it's based on science, and this is where all the latest science is. As you know, like neuroscience is making incredible strides. Every day I get research push to me that shows me the latest thing that's been discovered. And it's just the rapid developments that are occurring are just amazing. And so, there's a lot of coaching modalities out there that aren't related to neuroscience, and they're old and outdated, and they don't really align with science. And so neuroscience coaching goes directly to how the brain works and how it will accept and process change. And so clearly we want to work with something that's proven, so that we know that it works and it's sustainable. There's lots of things you could do to maybe correct a behavior, but nothing that transforms at a deeper level like neuroscience coaching. And that's what we try to do is we go into the how all this stuff is constructed in the brain and then reconstruct it for people so that it's transformational, it's long lasting and sustainable. They become different people as a result. It isn't just, I want to lose 30 pounds. Okay, well, let's stop eating as much and eat a few different things. Okay, great, I've lost 30 pounds, but is that really changing you at a core level in terms of every other aspect of your life and how you operate, your relationship with yourself, your relationship with the world around you? Like, are you really seeing things differently and approaching things differently if you just changed your diet for a few months? So this is at a much deeper science-based transformational level.
Right. I've always been a fan of this idea, which is Jim Rohn, actually from what I know, at least, which is this idea of before achieving any goals, you must become the person that can achieve any goals. He was talking about, if you'd like to make $1 million, well, you first basically need to be the person in which can acquire such wealth, which is a very interesting concepts. And I think that's the difference between quick fixes and long-lasting changes. You can get lucky and win the lottery, but as we know, upwards of about 74% of those become broke in the next years to the next decades, because they are not the person in which have the abilities to not only acquire but to retain such wealth. I think it's the exact same thing for all the other goals. Basically, you can mention like losing 30 pounds, for example. Is that been your observation as well when you're dealing with coaching?
Yeah, which is why I pursue transformational coaching, because, I'm not really interested in, I just don't find it as meaningful to help somebody achieve a short-term goal, but then the likelihood of it not being sustainable or not impacting people at a deeper level where they can then self-manage themselves to achieve other goals down the road.
Mm-hmm.
Or, to me, helping them become the people that they actually want to become. And there's always this acid question of, if you were to die tomorrow, are you happy with how you're going to go out? Are you the person you want to be at the deepest level? Are you, from a humanistic standpoint, not have you made the amount of money or any of those extrinsic rewards? I'm talking about, are there regrets as to how you've traveled through life and who you are as a person? Mm-hmm. And if you say no to that, then that sounds like an opportunity to transform. And that's what I'm looking for, is people that want to make that transformation.
Makes sense. And when you're thinking about this concept of merging, obviously science, neuroscience in this case, with personal experience, I'm looking forward to having some of your personal perspective on this, because I think this is what makes you and perhaps very few others very special. Is obviously your personal experience is very extensive in the art of transforming yourself. How does that play a role basically into all you actively coach others? And perhaps you see that as a not only a part of your unique selling proposition, but just an unfair advantage over the other people within this market?
Yeah. What's really most important is how the client views it, right? And very often, a lot of what a client gets out of this is, sure, there's information, but that relationship that you have with that other person. Relationships are key in our lives, as we know. And so if we're going to get down deep into someone's most personal aspects, they're only going to want to share that with someone that they feel that connection with. And for them to look across the desk at me and see someone that's actually gone through it themselves, I think they feel a sense of connection there. And you know how it is. Sometimes you'll go to a therapist and, you just don't feel like, well, they've gone through what you've gone through. They don't understand.
Sure.
And they may have all the wisdom in the world, and, and maybe that's not a big deal for some people, but, when you're traveling through some of these issues that I help people with, really troubling thoughts and feelings and behaviors and even addiction, those are very personal things. And so I just think it helps the client to feel like they've got someone on their side that's been through it. I'm very empathetic. I'm very compassionate because I know what it feels like, but I'm also no nonsense, direct, and to the point. Like you have to, there can't be a lot of extensive hand-holding. Like, we have to get on with the science of change. And so there's that nice blend of really feeling what the person's dealing with, and yet, taking them and let's move. Okay, let's get your life better.
Fantastic. The one thing that I've always been amazed in what neuroscience is best in my life, because truly neuroscience is more of a way of living than a singular application to a singular topic. It's truly the science of habit formations, right? I think that's one of the book that I cite very often is Atomic Habits, obviously by James Clear. Fantastic book, by the way, if anyone wants to check it out. But I think Aristotle was actually probably the greatest quotes on what excellence and habit is, which is we are what we repeatedly do, and therefore excellence is not an act, it's an habit, and something that is obviously constructed and flourishing in time. Tell me more about how habits are first formed in the brain before basically are actually implemented within the body.
Yeah, so mental life and behavioral life, everything that we experience is constructed in the moment. So I think a lot of us believe that we're hardwired to think, feel, or behave in certain ways, and that's not actually the case. Everything is constructed from what's happening in the moment, and then the brain will go to our past experiences and bring the scenarios, the templates, or the concepts that are most like what we're experiencing now, and make a prediction on how it should think, feel, and behave. The reason the brain predicts and doesn't grind through endless analysis on what to do in every situation is because the brain has a lot of work to do in a day, right? I mean, as soon as this situation's over, it's got to move on to the next. And so in the interest of resource efficiency, time and energy, which are calories, it's constantly making predictions about what you should do in that moment based on how you've experienced things in the past. Mm-hmm. So that's why, and then that prediction comes forward into your mind, and let's say you act out upon it again, the way your brain has predicted it. Well, what happens then is that neural pathway that represents that scenario that it brought forward to you, and you then act it out, you are now delivering more neural transmission through that pathway, more chemicals, more electricity, which is like fertilizer. It makes it stronger and stronger and stronger. Okay, and so that's why when people act out the same patterns over and over again, and they keep coming up into their minds and they keep reenacting them, that's habit formation. You are now fertilizing these neural pathways to become stronger and stronger. And so your brain keeps bringing them. So if you want to develop new habits, you simply have to start thinking, feeling, and behaving in new and different ways. And that's very a conscious process. It's very front brain oriented because your brain hasn't experienced them before, so it doesn't have those habits yet. So you have to consciously work at them until you've repeated them often enough that now those templates go back into your memory and are of use for future prediction. So that's where this initial process of habit formation is very front brain oriented. It requires a lot of energy. You have to work at it until those neural pathways that represent that habit, that behavior begin to develop. And once you repeat them often enough, it becomes a habit, and it transfers out of your conscious mind into your subconscious mind and becomes more autonomic.
Very interesting. There's this interesting, I wouldn't say debates, but there's this very interesting conversations now about this concept of motivations and discipline, sort of this stoic line of thought that we see a lot with modern thought leaders. But we've been seeing those thought basically ever since probably Marcus Aurelius, obviously millenniums ago. But when you're thinking about the roles of dopamine and motivation is in basically in sustaining change, there's no doubt that for basically any discipline to be built upon, to be perhaps acquired, there's a need for this initial spark of motivations to act upon it. Tell me more about basically that balance and just how important dopamine truly is within this process.
Well, it's critical because, one thing I said early on in the podcast was the brain doesn't do anything unless it's rewarded. So you can think of your brain as a dog. And frankly, our midbrains are not that dissimilar. There's a lot of correlation. And that's why so much research is done on insects and animals, because there is quite a bit of correlation to parts of the human brain. Our front brains are completely different, but you would never get a dog to do anything unless you rewarded it, unless you treated it. And unless you treated it enough. Notice how, you don't give a dog a treat one time and expect it to do the trick right away, right? It's right. A habit-forming process, and a reward is a critical loop-closing component of habit formation, where the reward is what closes the loop and makes it cement as motivating, okay? And so that's why in whatever we're doing with human beings here, creating transformational change, we have to identify what this change is going to mean to them at an intrinsic level. So not extrinsic, not, great, this is going to help me buy a new car. It's what is this going to help me do from a meaning and purpose and calling and identity standpoint. And that's what we're trying to get them to visualize and tie a lot of emotion to, is how this new life is going to look like for them, what rewards it's going to present for them. And then along the way, as we're transforming and building new habits, it's critical to experience these short-term rewards that help the brain want to keep going. Because if you don't continually reward it and recognize reward in the process, it won't want to keep going. That's why people fall out of change so much, is because they're not consistent with it and they're not experiencing reward out of it.
Interesting. And obviously, George, you work with a lot of high achievers, and it's very interesting because being an high achiever myself, but also being in rooms with people far basically ahead of myself within this journey, the interesting thing is we all struggle with psychological and perhaps mental blocks, as we like to call them nowadays. What are the most typical mental blocks you see in high achievers?
I don't know if, blocks is an interesting word to look. I'd call it patterns.
Okay. Patterns, sure.
Yeah. Things that continue to pop up for them that are unhelpful and unwanted. And again, these things, likely developed out of childhood, the experiences that we experience, how we were brought up. And so then we take those with us into adulthood. And if we have no reason to reform or reshape or reframe them or transform out of them, they just continue to live with us. But it's things like, take my case as an example. I was angry a lot. I constantly saw other people as threats. I didn't have patience for people if they weren't keeping up or they weren't performing at a level I thought they should. So it's just a lot of relationship type stuff where I just really struggle with getting along with other people. And the problem with that is if you're building a business, like you need people and they're your most important asset, really. And the whole output from your business is reliant upon the output from the people that you work with. And so it really stands to reason that that's one of the skills we should be really good at, is how to motivate and, and get those people to perform at their optimum levels. But if we're not equipped to do that, there's that conflict always. And so that's what I try to help people do is take what things they're struggling with that are affecting their ability to achieve success and help them transform out of those.
Mm-hmm. There's this very wide but interesting topic of the imposter syndrome. I see this within my own life. I see this within pretty much all people who are basically risk takers, which most entrepreneurs are risk takers to a certain extent. When you're thinking about not only what the imposter syndrome is from a neuroscientific basically definitions, but also how you can, I wouldn't say, oh yes, you need to combat it, but how can you basically use it in your best interest as a point of leverage instead of a point of dismiss? How do you basically balance it? And is that something that you deal with your work with high achievers?
Yeah, there's sense of being an imposter.
Yeah, imposter syndromes in general, yeah.
Yeah. So really when you think about imposter syndrome, it's, feeling like that you don't really belong. This isn't really who you are. You're not capable of being this person, right? And so that really gets back to self-esteem issues, self-doubt, lack of confidence, which again can come from upbringing, how someone was brought up, not feeling like they are worthy and capable. And so, we really just try to, really dive into the thinking behind that, the experiential, how those experiences were constructed for that individual, what caused them to get to that place of thinking that they're an imposter. And then we deconstruct those. So again, all this mental life is constructed in the first place. And so we pick that apart and analyze it as to how they're arriving at this conclusion. And then we reconstruct it based on truth or reframing certain beliefs that they might have. And so the problem is they practice this way of thinking over and over again, and this muscle has been strengthened. So now they really believe it, right? And it's got neurotransmission running through it. So we just deconstruct that way of believing and then reconstruct it a different way, and then start to practice that, which develops new neural pathways around their visions of themselves.
Yeah, there was this interesting interview with Emily Dickinson, and she was talking about the fact that your brain is wider than the sky, right? There's no limit to self-knowledge, and that quest of being a lifelong learner is one that is shared amongst pretty much all high achievers to a certain extent. When you're thinking about neuroscience and its applications to optimizing business performance itself, you mentioned about the fact that obviously your people to a very large extent actually is the greatest asset of any business. They're the one that actually move things forwards. We might debate with the help of technology these days, but certainly an incredible vehicle of business performance itself. How are you able to attach neuroscience basically concepts into not only making better people, but also basically through making better people, optimizing their business itself?
Well, any business owner or someone that runs a business will tell you, their people are their most, they spend more time on their people than anything else. Mm-hmm. But what you also hear across industry right now is that there's stress and burnout. So, clearly people do not perform their best when they're stressed and burned out, right? There's all kinds of neuroscience related impact, negative impact resulting from stress and burnout. So if your endpoint is to have your business perform at an optimum level, then clearly having your people perform at an optimum level is critical. Mm-hmm. And so it's how you view the culture that you've created for your workers to be the best they can be so their output can be the best it can be. And I just think that there's this culture around working people hard, not paying enough attention to what's going to cause them to be their best, that maybe we need to take a new look at. There's just this, this developed mode that we've come to in industry where, it's just grind it out quarter by quarter, perform, without really understanding, okay, there are people involved in this. What's going to cause them to perform their best? And then if you pay attention to that, work on the process of people performing their best, then ultimately the results take care of themselves. So it's not so much focusing on the results, it's focusing on the process that's going to deliver the result.
Makes sense. Absolutely. When you're thinking about the common mistakes that most people basically make when they're trying to change their habits, what are they and what are them? Excuse me. And perhaps how can a coach and consultant like you be of great help within this journey?
Well, it's going to be those setbacks, because this is not a linear process. We all have these habits, experiences that have been built up, these neural pathways, and they're going to keep resurfacing. So we'll have sessions, I'll have a session with someone and we outline what to do for the next week, but then they hang up the phone or the Zoom, and then they go back to their lives and life happens, and these old patterns that have developed will resurface, and it's what do they do in those moments, right? And so there's this constant 2 steps forward, 1 step back process that occurs, which is only natural. And so that's where motivation and commitment are critical on the part of the individual, that they see this long-term gain that's out there for them. They've attached reward to it. They can't wait to get there, and they just stick with it long enough, following a process that allows them to pick themselves back up again when they get set back and reapply until these new neural pathways begin to form, and it becomes the new modus operandi instead of the old way. And it'll happen at just pace. You begin to see results in a few weeks, but, really after 3 months, if you're motivated, you'll see some pretty shit.
Mm-hmm. It's so interesting because that's something that I think is worthy of mentioning and going deeper to and it's actually, I think it's called, is actually attributed to a dictator of all people, Joseph Stalin. But whoever control your words, control your reality, your world. And you had this great comments that you believe that true transformations happen at the intersections of science and spirituality. When you're thinking about not only what is necessary, but just how important conscious intentions, which is this understanding in which you're not just drifting to life, this flight or fight mode, but you're consciously and intentionally basically shaping that reality of yours. Tell me more about not only of the neuroscientific application of such things, but in a world where distractions it basically has become not only the norm, but vividly accepted inside our societies, just how important that framework and not only knowing what that reality is, but applying it consciously is as we speak.
Yeah, it's critical. And that's why early on, these things are one day at a time, and has a parallel to addiction where you just try to get through one day at a time. And when you're building this new life that you envision for yourself, it really is one day at a time. And what I try to encourage is a lot of daily practices, foundational pillars that you build your life, you build your day around, that work with this idea of intention, starting with a morning ritual that, I recommend being 20 to 30 minutes. And if that means you have to get up 20 or 30 minutes earlier, then that's what I recommend. And that's all evolves around quiet time, no phones, where it's visualizing and journaling, reinforcing this idea of intention. What is this new life going to be? What does it represent for me? What am I going to do today to further myself down this path? And that's where meditation and mindfulness are really helpful because, you wake up first thing, you're energized, there are no distractions, you further your focal focus through meditation, singularity. And what's happening in that period of time is that you are creating the beginnings of these neural pathways, because the brain doesn't know the difference between you visualizing something and you actually doing it. As far as it's concerned, it's the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so what happens is you set these intentions for the day, and your brain then is locked in on those. And then if you repeat that morning ritual every day, then you begin to, your brain begins to experience a lot of reward from that. And it just sets an incredible amount of focus for the day to achieve the things that you need to achieve.
Beautiful. I'm really interested by this. Obviously, you mentioned at the very beginning of this interview, talking about the fact that now your objective is to let the world flourish and benefit from your knowledge, and that's why you have this coaching and consultancy company in the first place. Tell me more about what's next for you, and how do you hope perhaps to impact even more lives through the work that you do in the future?
Yeah. So, I just want to continue doing what I'm doing. I do one-on-one coaching. I do group coaching. My target clientele is working professionals, high performers, that are struggling with some aspect of their mental or behavioral lives. And so I just maybe hope to develop some additional coursework where I can, spread that out even further. Maybe write a book or two. We'll see. But right now I'm just really focusing on helping individuals, helping corporations, maybe further their views on, employees' mental well-being, how to get more out of their employees, to help them benefit their bottom lines, but just also view their human potential differently.
Incredible. Be the change you wish to see in the world. Mr. George Haymaker, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the Meaningful Podcast. It's been just an incredible emotional journey, even for me as the host, to go through your life and some of your best insights. I would be very honored if you could share some last words of wisdom with our audience.
Certainly. I again, just look at your brains as your partner, and give it the respect that it deserves. We spend so much time maybe caring for other parts of our body, not as much time as we should caring for our brains. It is the center of our being. Everything comes from it, and it's there to serve you and be what you can be, whoever you want to be, just by partnering with it and shaping it and forming it and having it be the reflection of who you want to be.
Thank you for spending your time with us today on the Meaningful Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review or share it with someone who could benefit from it. And always remember, your story matters. Make it meaningful. We hope to see you next time.